My friends, it's time to grab this Karl Mortar from last week and move it next door, from my building workbench to the painting workbench. Now, this is a huge and complicated model, and painting it won't be an easy feat, more like painting several models at once. I thought about this in advance and kept it in these large subassemblies. Although I tried to keep the number of loose and small parts to a minimum, there are gonna be a few that will have to be impaled on toothpicks. A small hole somewhere out of sight and a drop of superglue will take care of that. The running gear has a lot of wheels, but the idlers and return rollers are glued to the hull, so I only have to handle the road wheels and drive sprockets. Just my luck that these fit without any drilling or other unpleasant modifications, and they'll be easy to detach and reattach later. Well, if I'm honest, breaking a model apart for painting is not my favorite job. I'd much rather look at it in the fully assembled state, but then I'd never finish anything, now would I? And there's an even more unpleasant task ahead of me, but equally important. This model collected a ton of dust during the assembly stage. Not just regular dust floating in the air, but the kit was showing its age, and that meant a lot of filling, sanding and scraping. So you can imagine that it was in a totally unpaintable state. Washing your models in soapy water before painting is generally a good habit, and it also removes the grease from your fingers and various remnants of chemicals, such as debonders or soldering fluxes. Just make sure to handle the model in a latex glove once it dries, because you don't want to re-grease that surface again. It's my tradition to always break something at this point, but surprisingly, maybe because I was extra cautious, I didn't snap anything, and let me tell you, there's a lot of stuff you can break on a Karl Mortar. Anyway, a big model means a lot of water that needs to dry, but a portable fan will speed up the process. And for this next step, the official kit box will come in handy, because we're about to start priming. But not the usual way using an airbrush, because then it will take me an entire day. Probably. Instead, I'll try to live dangerously and hit it with a spray can. Fixing the model to this octopus M2M attachment will make handling much easier, as I won't have to touch the hull during the entire process. I glued a small nut inside of the hull for this purpose. To be fair, it's best to take this job outside, because a spray can will release a ton of aerosols all around you. Yes, the process is fast, but you'll pay a messy price. A spray mask is an absolute must as well, because all of that black aerosol will fall right into your lungs. On top of that, black snot running out of your nose doesn't leave the best impression on ladies. Trust me on that. One might feel intimidated by the rattle can and the huge amount of primer it releases, but it actually has very good self-leveling properties, and if you make swift movements and always start spraying away from the model, the completely dried surface will be beautifully smooth and no details will be harmed either. Well, a large model needs a lot of resources, and at the end of the session I was down 1 can of primer. I actually left it all dry over an entire weekend because I didn't find any time to get to the workbench, and the first thing I did on Monday was attach the hull to the octopus painting stand. I won't have to turn the model around quickly in my hand anymore, and a stable mount such as this one will make the airbrushing more enjoyable and also more precise. Okay then, I think we're ready to start airbrushing, and just like with the primer, I have 2 bottles of German Grey, just in case. However, I'll mix it with a bit of buff and, of course, glossy varnish. Honestly, I don't know the ratios because I never cared to write them down, and instead of chasing specific mixing formulas, I'd rather rely on what I see in front of me and what seems appropriate for the job at hand. In this case, my goal was a reasonably glossy, slightly lighter version of German Grey with a visible warm hue. Now, German Grey might be one of the best colors to be used with a completely black primer undercoat. I'm spraying it with my cheap, disposable Fengda BD130 with a 0.2mm needle. What makes this approach so fun and quick considering the size of the model is that you don't have to worry about coverage. Naturally, the black primer will cast fake shadows in tight areas where you won't be able to reach comfortably, but also If you spray the paint in a cloudy, uneven pattern, the result will have these nice, subtle stains all over the surface, and these will help us make the upcoming layers more exciting. I was a bit worried about some hard-to-reach areas, especially behind the fragile handrails, but it wasn't bad at all. You will actually get a better understanding of the model's surface and shapes during this stage, and you'll be able to adjust your approach accordingly. I know it's polite to always talk about air pressure, but honestly, I wouldn't know. I have it roughly set to 15 psi at all times, and if I need to make small adjustments, I just turn the controller in one direction or the other without looking at the dial, because it's more important to see what's happening on your bench than on some cheap, uncalibrated pressure gizmo. Anyway, this is our first and darkest layer. For me, the Karl Mortar looks best in Panzer Grey. Nothing against the 3-tone camouflage, I just think the grey color makes it look like a piece of super heavy machinery, because that's actually what it is. Moving on, it's time to switch from the 130 to the 180, which is my dedicated, cheap, disposable airbrush for detail work, be it post shading or camouflages. The next layer is mixed with the OG color that I just used, but I added more buff and gloss varnish into it. It's better to just look at the paint and decide how light you need it to be. At least in my personal experience, it's more effective than counting drops of paint and thinner. And if you're not certain, always try it out on one of these wheels, because these will eventually be heavily covered with earth effects. If everything seems good, then I guess it's all good. Here's what we'll try to achieve: unshaded side of the cradle and post-shaded side. The difference is usually subtle with these initial layers, but we'll gradually build the contrast up as we move along. This first layer will cover the majority of the surface. It's easy to get lost in the amount and intensity of these layers, and I don't give them names or anything, but if we break them down, they'd go something like this: black primer, shadow layer, that's the darkest version of the base color, highlight 1, highlight 2, 3, and so on, depending on how far you want to push the contrast. Someone might be happy with just this one highlight, and that's perfectly okay. However, I like to push the effect as much as possible because weathering tends to knock it down a lot. Another huge advantage is how you can emphasize and stress out the shape of your model and bring out the various surface details. This vehicle is made out of details and complex shapes, and not pushing the post shading would be a missed opportunity for me. We can also learn some interesting facts. For example, we knew the cradle can house a 60 cm mortar, but now we know it's just big enough for an entire airbrush. Highlights should always be directional, be it from one specific side or the general overhead light. And because I'm displaying the mortar at its highest elevation, 70 degrees by the way, the light should be applied accordingly. The walkways are another great spot for this technique. Their texture and lots of small details are a post-shading playground. Shading through the handrails wasn't fun, but I found an easier way later. Well, here we have it after the first spraying session. There's not much going on in the contrast department, but the model is becoming lighter and the initial layout of the highlights is already there. Next, I added more buff into the previous mixture and repeated the process. But here's the trick to smooth yet textured gradients. Yes, I'm spraying everything in that tight cloudy pattern, keeping my airbrush close to the surface and everything, but I'm covering a smaller area than the previous layer. That's the point with artificial shading. Each layer is lighter, but covers a smaller area. It's literally the same thing, just less of it. However, it's clear that we're getting somewhere and the details are beginning to pop. The gradients are also doing their job, and we can see here how far we've gone from the initial dark color. The third layer is gonna have slightly more buff in the previous mixture, but I also added a bit of pure white. Sometimes you reach a point where adding more of the same paint would completely distort the original paint. In my case, the Panzer Grey would start turning into Panzer dust. That's actually something I didn't talk about. My usual Panzer Grey recipe is just Tamiya German Grey in white. The result is awesome with that sweet bluish tint. This time I wanted to try something different. My friend used buff on his Panzer 38T, the one I finished for him last year, and I liked it a lot. Also, I imagine the Karl Mortar was covered in a lot of dust. It was a hot summer in 1942 and it was constantly blasting these 60cm shells, and that would definitely stir some dust around it. So this warmer, dustier tone might enhance that look. And lastly, it'll work better with the field applied camouflage. Now we have reached that sweet spot where the model looks more interesting than it should. I absolutely love this stage, but guess what? We can enhance the details and break up the surface even further. But this time I'll just add pure white to the previous mixture. And we're only gonna focus on the small surface details. Various fixtures, hinges, hatches and so on. And these don't have to be textured at all. It actually makes the finish more interesting when you can combine the mottled, textured finish with some smooth surfaces here and there. It's that cherry on top that makes a model look very special. Oh, and so far I totally ignored the handrails, because I knew I'd spray them with the lightest tone. This is also the only place where some kind of masking was required. But before we take a look at the entire model, let's deal with the decals. An obligatory layer of Tamiya clear varnish underneath, and while it's drying, we prepare the markings. Trumpeter provides us with markings for different vehicles, but I chose THOR. It sounds like metal and thunder, and it also had an interesting camouflage. Well, these decals are really thick, and it's just my luck that there's a heavily textured cast steel underneath. But there wasn't a single decal in my life that would be too sturdy. Decal setting solutions of any type or brand do a quick job, but sometimes they need a bit of help. I got used to this, I call it hammering with a stiff brush, because that's what I'm essentially doing. Softening the decal with a solution and then stippling it or hammering into the textured surface. Clear varnish is important in this approach because the solutions will soften the paint and you can easily damage it if you're not careful. Or you don't have a protective shield made from clear varnish underneath. Looking at the decal under an angle where it shines helps you to see how successfully your hammering attempts are, and if you need to add more brute force. Once that was done, I sprayed them very gently with a very diluted highlight color. This will subtly blend them with the surface, and they'll look way more natural. And then a thick layer of VMS satin varnish will completely integrate them into the surface, and we'll be able to see how good or bad of a job we've done. Well, I think they turned out pretty well, considering their quality wasn't top-notch. And the post-shaded surface is really something on this model. I think this is my favorite finish so far. So much so that I considered leaving it like this. But what caught my attention was the hastily applied field camouflage on THOR. This picture is from Sevastopol in 1942, an entire year before German dark yellow was introduced, so the light stripes have to be something else. Well, guess what? Yellow-brown, a desert color used by Deutsche Afrika Corps, was used to some extent on the Eastern Front as well, so it's most likely gonna be that. Camouflage paints need very specific mixing ratios, and naturally, I did my own thing. A lot of thinner, the new-ish XF92, which is very nice by the way, and you know, not too much, not too little, a generous amount of clear varnish, and a bit of buff to make it lighter. The final consistency is the most important thing, and check out how it's running down the cup. That right there is your best measure before you even pour it into the airbrush and do some test spraying. To be honest, I was reluctant with this step. I didn't want to cover the post shading, and I sure didn't feel confident enough to make an exact replica of the real camouflage. It's obvious that it wasn't sprayed with too much TLC, and if you're trying to replicate that, you have two options. Botch the spraying or botch it on purpose. I went with the latter, and the point is to make it obvious that you, the author, know how the airbrush actually works, but you sprayed it imperfectly on purpose. Well, my interpretation of this camouflage and the look I was most happy with is this semi-transparent, very subtle pattern. It doesn't stand out like a sore thumb, and you can actually use the paint underneath to do the post shading for you. Because if there's a dark paint showing through, the camouflage will look darker. And the same applies to highlights. I was afraid at first, but I quickly developed my own squiggly pattern, and towards the end of the session, guess what happened? I was actually having fun. I mean, okay, I'd be perfectly happy with a plain Panzer Grey finish, but this was an opportunity to paint a unique model and give it a very interesting and unusual finish. Who would say no to that? After I was done, there was only one extra detail missing. There appears to be a serial number written on the mortar, but I can't make it out in its entirety. But, you know, it's there in the photo, it's there on my model, and that's all that matters. Although I was very afraid at first, now I can say the camouflage was a good choice. To enhance the field-applied look, I sprayed the mortar in the cradle and painted only those areas I could reach with the gun in the horizontal position. Of course, the camouflage was very glossy compared to the rest of the model, because, you know, after all, the glossy varnish is there to saturate the paint, so it doesn't turn darker after varnishing, and to also make it spray smoother and give it some translucency. All important features, but the sheen isn't necessary, so I gave the model a very generous, very wet, and very thick layer of VMS satin varnish, which will give me a smooth surface to work with during the upcoming weathering steps. So yeah, that will do it for tonight, my friends. I forgot to mention the 60cm barrel and how I painted it in a different shade. The historical photo makes it look like the barrel has a smoother and darker finish, and the lifespan of these was only 50 shots. So replacements were pretty common, and it's not hard to imagine a replacement barrel in a darker, fresher tone of Panzer Grey, or a dark grey, heat-resistant factory primer. It's just one extra visual detail for this model. Anyway, this was a lot of fun and I enjoyed every bit of this process. The model is so busy that there's always something to highlight and outline, and it's very satisfying to watch the model turn from a dark hunk of coal into this, although totally artificial and unnatural, but an exciting replica of the real thing. Up next is weathering, and I will release it as a full video. That means no breaking into episodes where we go one step at a time. It'll take a while to finish the model, so I'm not sure when the video will be ready, but I'll make sure to drop you some other type of content in the meantime. Until then, I want to say thank you for watching, and a special thanks goes to my amazing patrons who make this show possible. If you like what I'm doing, want to get more of it, and in return support my work, you can go to my Patreon page and see what kind of reward would you like. I'm posting there almost every day with updates from my workbench. We can get in touch through DMs, comments, and emails. I'm posting 1 week early ad-free videos. I also have some small 3D models for detailing your projects, a bunch of references from the real world if you need inspiration for old buildings, landscapes, and so on, and these beautiful studio photos which you can download in full resolution. Alright, dear friends, if I'm honest, I haven't seen too many Karl Mortars finish on the internet. It's a pretty notorious vehicle and very iconic, but as I'm working on the model, I'm starting to understand why it's not a popular subject. It's big, fragile, and complicated to build and paint. And I'm sure the weathering will be even more difficult, but hey, it'll make the finished model even more special because there are just so few of them out there. Anyway, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers!